For generations of video game consoles, game developers have always found ways to bulk up a game by adding additional content beyond what you would first see in the main game. Oftentimes, it was to give the game some replay value so that you wouldn't abandon the game forever once you played through with it. Sometimes, finding hidden content within a game helped to add to the story or gave you an advantage when going up against a particularly nasty boss. Sometimes hidden content was added purely for fun. For example, unlimited ammo for weapons. However, all this content was found on the cartridge or disc and all unlocked through gameplay. With this current generation, however, studios have decided that one way to make more money on games is to create downloadable content. Whether it's additional content that didn't come on the disc, or the slightly more sneaky method, paying for a code to access content on a disc you already purchased. Is this a good idea for the industry, or is it just a way to further drive up the cost of gaming? Find out our thoughts right here on Downloadable Content. Welcome, greetings, salutations, everybody. Welcome to Downloadable Content. I'm Brian, and with me on this episode, we have Ben.
Howdy, y'all.
Joshy.
Hello.
Again with the sultry Ryan.
Hello.
And Ronnie.
Salutations.
And greetings.
Indeed.
So here we are on this episode of Downloadable Content talking about the interesting issue of what has become a relatively new phenomenon in the gaming industry, and that's the advent of purchasing additional content to further augment a game. And we're going to discuss whether we think that's a good idea, or is it just another sneaky way to drive up the price of what already is, or can be, a very expensive game. If you want, you can also, once this episode ends, once you've finished listening to it, you can find us at facebook.com/downloadablecontent or on Twitter at DLContent and give us your thoughts. We'd love to hear it. So I think by now we all have had experience, and probably all of us at least own at least one of the current gaming consoles of this generation.
Correct.
Be it Wii, PS3, or 360. Although I think Nintendo is still trying to figure out what exactly is an online network. But
no, that's Sony you're thinking of. Nintendo's the ones who just doesn't offer anything.
What, friend codes aren't a great idea? They're not the future of gaming?
A friend code for every single game you purchase? That gets a little excessive. Maybe one standard code for...
Nah, fuck that.
You don't understand. The internet has pedophiles. They will get you.
Of course.
Yes, through friend codes. Yes, because that's certainly one way to get the pedophiles. As let's find them on Mario Kart. Sure.
That's right.
So we'll just go right into the discussion. Now, we all have experienced, the idea of unlocking additional content through gameplay through the years. Whether you beat a game and you get, say, an additional costume or an additional weapon or unlimited ammo for a weapon or additional mini games, things like that. However, historically, all that content was found on the cartridge or the disc, and it was always accessed through gameplay. You always had to meet a certain criteria, beat the game in under a certain amount of time, or beat the game without using any any specific item.
Or in the older games, figure out the correct password.
Yeah.
Metroid's a great example of that.
There you go. Before the advent of saving, you had passwords. Notebooks and notebooks of passwords, or unless you had a game genie in which you could circumvent all that.
And we all know the worst part of that was the passwords with zeros and O's, and you never knew which one you were writing down.
Oops.
The Dark Ages.
But I mean, all of this stuff was meant to, as I said in the intro, to beef up a game. It was to make it so that the game had replay value.
So you were less likely to sell it on the used market. Which I think was one of the major things that the video game industry thought. The more you can make somebody want to hold on to the game, the less likely it's going to be sold secondarily, and people will have to buy more new copies if they want them.
Precisely. And, you know, I'm perfectly okay with that. I mean, I'm of the opinion that, hey, once you buy the game, then everything on it is yours. It's, you know...
Well, one thing you mentioned in the intro, it's not that this is necessarily a new concept, because the computer gaming industry has been using downloadable content like this for 15 years.
That's correct.
Now it's finally coming to the consoles now that they have internet.
What's this internet you speak of?
The devil, that's what it is.
The thing that Al Gore invented. But yes, you are correct, Ronnie. Downloadable content really is now a new thing for the consoles. Because I don't play PC games, this was never really much of a factor. But yes, you're right.
Well, in the PC games, it was a good thing because games 2-3 years after they came out could be kept alive by adding additional content. Now, making people download it, you know, pay for it, might be questionable, but it kept the game alive. With console games, that's not as big of a problem.
And also, you'll probably find that a lot of those games back in the day, because the facilities weren't there, they simply offered these editions for free.
Some of them, yes.
Well, I mean, I know that, you know, there are online games in which, you know, new patches, new information, new gameplay is coming out all the time. I mean, it seems, you know, every so often Blizzard, for example, releases something new for Warcrack, and it continues the gameplay.
But you're paying a subscription fee constantly for the investment of that development. I think really what the big elephant in the room is there's a big difference between quote downloadable content that's actually on the disc and downloadable content that we produced after the game was shipped.
That's a good point.
Yes, and that is definitely something we'll discuss as we move further along. With, you know, this new, with downloadable content now on the console market, I don't know if there's less incentive now to spend so much time on a video game when all you need to do now is just buy your augmentation to the game.
Well, what about things like, to give an example, the new Mega Mans that have come down on the Wii, and also on the Xbox, I believe. But they allow you to buy Proto Man as a downloadable content. Something that probably took about, 10 minutes for them to code. Yet it's not in the actual game.
Stuff like that where there was clearly no effort in development of it. I mean, it's the horse armor example from Elder Scrolls. I mean, that's just taking people's money because idiots will buy it.
But idiots will buy it. I mean, it's. Let's be honest here. Let's not kid ourselves. These games exist, these systems exist so that they can sell us things and they can make money. And if people wouldn't buy it, they wouldn't be producing it. The horse armor example that you bring up, Joshua, is really like the first big example I remember of a mainstream, like people, up in arms over something costing money that it was clearly, like you said, just thrown together in 10 minutes. But people still bought it. These things wouldn't keep happening if people didn't keep paying for them, is part of the problem.
You need to vote with your wallets.
That's exactly right. It's the same people who complain about stores that they don't like, yet they shop at them. If you don't like what they're doing with the gaming industry, then stop voting with your wallet.
But
hypocrites like that.
There's also a difference, though, between downloadable content that is added and is kind of useless, like costumes and extra characters. And then there's downloadable content where you can pay to unlock a car that you could access through the game, but I'm lazy, so I'm going to pay for it.
So you're saying that game studios know this and can profit on our inherent laziness?
Yeah, particularly people like EA. They will offer basically all the unlockable... Think of like... This doesn't happen with Nintendo, obviously, but think about Mario Kart. You have to unlock everything in Mario Kart.
Mm-hmm.
But this is offering all those unlocks to be unlocked for more money.
Yeah, and you see that a lot in the casual gaming market. I mean, it's off the consoles, at least at this point, but Angry Birds for iPhone, for the Android, you can buy something that will unlock all of the levels from the company, will unlock all the things in the game so you can play what you want.
Then what's the point of playing the game?
Yeah, I
Great
think
point.
I kind of think that cheapens the value. I mean,
It does. You know, because people are just too lazy, and then they see that they can unlock everything by purchasing it. You know,
it will,
then what?
It
will. But then where's the joy in playing?
Well,
and
looking...
unlocking everything yourself.
Well, video gaming is, an experience. People pay for the experience, and they obviously are looking for a different experience than the rest of us are.
Yeah, if a casual, let's if somebody who's...
I mean, obviously, I'm not a casual gamer. I'm a little bit more than a casual gamer.
Right, but if you're just looking to play for something and you're not looking for a difficult experience, you're looking for just a fun, enjoyable experience. Maybe you don't want to play through the third level. Maybe you don't want to wait until you have to unlock all of these extra things. You want a little bit of a leg up. Maybe you're just getting more comfortable with the game system, so you figure, okay, let me play with an overpowered weapon, and then that way, when I'm a little bit more comfortable with the game system, if I want, I can go back and give myself more of a challenge. It's the opposite. I feel like a lot of times, and look at like the Resident Evil franchise is a good example. The weapons and things that they give you, you have to really earn them. And then when you turn around and once you're given them, the difficult experience you just had earning them is flipped on its head, and suddenly the game is significantly easier.
It's kind of like with new Super Mario Bros. Wii, where they have the autopilot mode to get you through a difficult part. It's the exact same concept.
I mean, really, this is taking... I mean, games had this function before. They're called difficulty levels. If I want a casual experience, I can set the game to easy and blow everyone apart.
But the easy mode won't...
This is game companies taking advantage of the fact people want that experience and selling them the more powerful weapon.
Well, but the easy mode would never play itself.
Well, unless you're Nintendo.
I guess the question for this is I don't know how the rest of you guys feel, but downloadable content, as Joshua said, that is created afterwards, adding new levels or adding new things that weren't created at the time to extend the life of the game. I think that's a great thing, and I think it's good they brought that into the console industry. I don't see them using it that way in a lot of cases, though.
Yes,
definitely.
I agree, and that'll go into my next point. I mentioned this in the intro. Game studios are administering downloadable content in a couple of ways. One being, as you just mentioned, a period of time goes by, maybe a year, 2 years after the game's release, and the studio creates new content and offers it for either for free or for a small price to extend the life of the gameplay. I mean, that's the same thing as a patch. Since this stuff did not exist when the game was initially created, I have no problem purchasing a scenario or an additional chapter or whatever to a game, provided that content wasn't already on the disc to begin with.
Yeah, I mean, a great example of that is something like Fallout 3, where Fallout 3 is a massive game that will take you hours to complete and has loads of side content. But they supported that game for nearly a year after it, every 3 months releasing a new chapter that they'd obviously spent making after the game had shipped. And I paid for all of those.
Can I play devil's advocate here for a second?
You usually do. Go right ahead.
Go right ahead.
Thanks. We're gonna have to kind of remember that there are, especially in this age, different definitions of what constitutes ownership when it comes to digital media. So think of any game where the creators announced that there would be something unlockable on the disc already that you'd have to pay for, even if they didn't announce it or you saw it later. Well, as far as they're concerned, and as would probably be held up under certain legal conditions, you got what you paid for, which is that main single-player primary experience. And whatever that second chapter or extra add-on was, in their minds, was not what was being sold to you. Now, where we kind of have the different definition of it is we're used to, well, we weren't told this was there, but that doesn't mean it's not there, because we're used to experiences like secrets and other unlockable content. This is content that they're reserving the right to charge for separate from the primary experience that we're used to. So from a certain legal ownership point of view, it's not really all that much of a stretch to what they're doing. It's not cool as far as we're concerned, because we're still used to the mentality that when you buy a disc, you own everything that's on it, and there are different definitions on what people find constitutes ownership. So I think that's, and I'm not saying I agree with that definition at all, but I wanted to at least establish that and throw it out there just to have people react to that.
You got a point. I'll say one thing about it, though. It's like buying a CD and being told you can't listen to track 15. It's locked out for you until you buy a code. I don't think that would fly with 90% of the people on this earth, but they don't think about it that way with video games.
And I agree. I'm just throwing out, like I said, the definitions so that we're kind of all on an even footing there.
It's even getting to some extreme cases, though. It's not that we're going to lock out this character or this costume or this weapon. It's some companies include a code when you purchase the game new, which unlocks the multiplayer, half the game. And if you buy that game pre-owned, you don't have that code and you have to pay for it. So you're paying to unlock half of what's on the disc.
Right, and again, I'm not, and that's also a little bit of a shot of they're using the opportunity to kind of try and discourage a pre-owned market. That's them trying to sort of bleed out game retailers and resellers, but that's and it ends up really, as with most cases where they try and combat piracy, it ends up hurting the legitimate players a lot more than it ends up hurting the pirates.
Especially as it doesn't say on the box, by the way, if you're getting this pre-owned, half of what's advertised on this box isn't accessible to you.
And the clerk at GameStop won't tell you, because then you'll argue that if I've got to pay $20 to unlock half the game anyway, then why am I giving you $50 for it?
Exactly.
I wanted to do this episode after I read some news. The new Mortal Kombat game, for example. NetherRealm Studios is going to be releasing the classic costumes and classic fatalities for several of its characters. All this stuff, however, is already on the disc. Because when this game was available for pre-order, different retailers offered different characters as a pre-order bonus. For example, GameStop. Since I pre-ordered it through GameStop, if you pre-ordered the game, you would be given a code to unlock Classic Scorpion and his fatality. Other retailers gave you a similar code to unlock Classic Sub-Zero and his fatality, or Classic Kitana, or Jade, or Melina, and their classic fatalities. So all this stuff is already on the disc. And the game is already $60 to begin with. Now you want me to pay more for this stuff that is already pre-existing on this disc?
Somehow I wish we still had Game Genius, because I think that would take care of our problem.
Suddenly a $60 game, you could end up paying $70, $80, $90 by the time it's all said and done.
Sometimes over $100 to get it.
Sometimes it's all said and done. I think that's absolutely ridiculous.
Is it worth it to pay for the cost of a second game just to get the full experience out of your first game?
Exactly.
It shouldn't be. I agree. You might need to pay a little bit extra, but not to the point where you could have bought another different game. You know, it's kind of a ripoff.
And that's where my problem lies, because again, if it's already and I know Ben brought up the devil's advocate point. It's with the age of digital technology, what constitutes ownership.
And you have to remember why they're doing this. The big issue is games cost millions now to develop, and rather than raising the box price, they're trying to get their money back somehow.
Yes, but do you think that in doing so they might alienate their own customer base by making a game in which, in order to get the full experience, you might end up shelling out $100?
Oh, definitely, but there's also, I mean, the retailer-specific issue is bullshit in its own way. There are some games that don't offer the other things to buy later, so I have to choose between these different retailers to buy the game I'm really enthusiastic about, and no matter where I go, I'm not going to get the full experience because there's this thing the other retailer has.
Well, the other thing to do with that, with a lot of these games, somebody else can go, I completely lost my train of thought. Wow.
Brain fart.
Yeah.
Well, while Ronnie decides where that thought went, as I've said, if it's additional Resident Evil 5, for example, put out additional scenarios that did not come on the disc itself.
They weren't very good, by the way.
One was better than the other.
Story, plot, whatever aside, the point is that they were not on the game when it originally came out. This was created a while after the game was released, and I didn't see a problem with shelling out an additional $5 for this side scenario, but I do have a problem with the fact, again, if the content is already on the disc, I feel that I shouldn't have to shell out additional dollars for it. But that's just me.
Well, one thing I'll say that I thought was a really nice gesture when they brought out Dragon Age Origins was giving out the Golems of Amgarak as just for free, because they were producing it and they weren't able to get it in the original game.
Yeah, if you look at something like Burnout Paradise, they supported that game. Criterion supported it with free DLC for feels like at least a year afterwards, and they added major content too. They added some significant upgrades. They added motorcycles. They added a day-night cycle to the game. They eventually, released a package of paid-for content, but that was something that was in development for years, and it was an entire second island to the game. So they at least kind of blended the two together, but nothing really kind of was already on the disc. So it's not impossible for a developer to continue to support a game afterwards, even with significant free upgrades. And apparently in some cases it's a way to drive sales continually. But it's a lot easier for them to just put something on the disc, lock it, and then sell, unlock codes or whatever it is months later.
I remember what I was actually going to say earlier.
All right.
Yeah. Yay!
This better bloody be good now.
Sorry about that. What I was going to say, along with your comment earlier, was that a lot of these companies that are doing these locked on disc content, they're not companies that are crying poverty. They're not companies that are, not recouping the losses they made for the game. These are companies that are making millions on the game they're making, and in a lot of cases it feels like they're milking the industry. A lot of the smaller companies, at least in my experience, are the ones who are making new content to try to drive the sales of the game.
And we have to remember that $60 is an incredible amount of money to pay for one piece of entertainment. I mean, they are getting a lot of your money for this game.
Yes, I mean 60 is the new 50 now. We've
and that's not a good thing.
It used to be $50 was the ceiling for a new
And then the 360 hit, and they pushed it up to 60 to see what would happen, and people still bought games. And so then when Sony came out, they decided to follow suit.
Which is why I'm so happy Nintendo's hasn't driven up their price.
They're getting there. How much does a 3DS title cost?
I don't know.
Yeah, I guarantee the next console will be $60.
It actually costs $60 now for a new 3DS game.
So
does it?
So a new 3DS game actually costs more than a new Wii game.
So and guys, let's remember that's a portable title. Well, here I'm looking at Ocarina of Time 3D, and it's saying $40.
But that's a raise from $30, which was
that's still creeping up there, guys. They're They used to be 20, 25, maybe 30 for DS titles.
Well, you got to remember one thing: most DS titles and most Wii titles, especially with the Wii, they cost a lot less to produce than the 360 and the PS3 titles. I was looking at some numbers a while back, and they cost about 30% less to make because they don't have to deal with quite as much in the graphic department and still look good compared to a lot of the 360 and the PS3 games.
I'm sure development on 3DS though is more expensive.
Well, it probably is. I don't know the numbers on the 3DS. It's way too new. But I mean, at least with the Wii, they can price it lower and make money, and that's part of how Nintendo's, being such a leader in the market.
So one of the things with downloadable content, though, just to play devil's advocate, is
not
that
you too.
I know.
Come to the dark side.
And actually, no, I'm going to withdraw that. I actually believe this. So, fuck you guys. So, I mean, we're complaining and saying, well, they're ripping us off, and this is unfair, and it's on the disc, blah 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 blah. However, we don't have to pay it. We also don't have to buy the game at $60. You can wait until it's cheaper. So, and most of this content is incidental. It's not like they're charging you to play the final level. They're charging you to unlock a weapon or a costume or maybe a new map. But this isn't stuff that you couldn't live without. So really, you don't have to pay it.
Well, I think it's the whole, we don't have to pay for any of this stuff, but I think the point Brian was bringing up in the intro was, this is a change. These are things that you used to take for granted in games earlier that now you're being told to pay for. Do you need to? Of course you don't. But it's not a welcome change, and I don't think it's bad for gamers to say that.
Good argument.
I was going to say, the companies, they're welcome to do whatever they can. They're a company. They're trying to make money. And they can do whatever they need to do to try to make money. It's just that if they do something that we feel lacks integrity or something that we feel that they're doing wrong, we have the option to not spend our money with them and go spend it with another company. Or keep it.
Unless you're Sony, and then we hack you.
Oh man, I
still on that? I'll be on it for a long time.
Wasn't that last show?
Although I'm glad that we actually waited about 28 minutes before somebody took a stab at Sony. So,
you're welcome.
Now, are you using the royal Wii there, or is there something we should know about?
I neither confirm nor deny.
You can't say with certitude. That's the new catchphrase now. It's after a political scandal going on here, and the new phrase is "I cannot say with certitude."
That's a good word.
I'll explain in the break, Ryan. I'll explain in the break. So yeah, that's so far some very good debate. We're going to now end this first half. In our second half, we'll talk about do we think whether this is a good idea or just another way to, milk the industry. We also are going to talk about games themselves that are released as a download in episodic format.
Because we know how well that goes.
We will just have that discussion. on our second half of this episode of Downloadable Content. So we'll be back. Welcome back to this second half of Downloadable Content, where we continue our discussion of downloadable content. We are all still here. All still here. Even Joshy, who's 5 hours ahead, is also still here.
Hello.
Again, with the sexy English voice.
Cue swooning.
Are you sure you shouldn't have him announcing all of this stuff? You might get more fans.
Oh, he might get more fangirls than anything else.
I might. But we move on into our second half. We will open up the discussion with this next question. Well, we've been talking about additional game content to augment gameplay and what we think, our views on, buying or not buying or whatever. But now we're going to shift gears into something a little bit more, another related topic. Games that are not disc-based. You purchase them, you download them, but they're only available in episodic format. For example, I will give a recent example: Sonic the Hedgehog 4.
Episode 1.
That went well for them.
Sonic 4 Episode 1. Now, I wouldn't have such a problem with it if Sega did not build up so much hype for Episode 1. Then Episode...
For 4 levels.
Episode
only
1,
4 levels.
Episode 1 came out, and not a peep. Not a peep since.
It was also a terrible game.
I enjoyed it.
I disagree, Joshy, but...
Yeah, I thoroughly enjoyed it.
Well, we need to have a separate podcast where we argue about this.
Simpler time.
Because Episode 1 was a terrible Sonic game, and the controls were nowhere near the standard of the Genesis.
They did definitely change the physics for the game, but I didn't think it was necessarily a bad thing. It just felt different. It took a little while to get used to.
Oh no, it was a bad thing. Anyway.
To continue, another game that did the same thing that I have a little bit more experience with was Final Fantasy IV: The After Years.
I also have that game. That's very true. In which you were required, really, to download each individual chapter of the game to the point where you ended up spending about $40.
Now the
Which is
difference,
So you basically spot a new game.
Yes.
The difference between
at the end of everything
is that Final Fantasy, the after years, they actually released all the episodes.
That's very true, and that was going to be my next point. That was the thing.
Yeah, they did on the PSP, right?
Well, it started as a Wii Virtual Console game.
Yeah.
A WiiWare game. But you're right, Joshy. I mean, the thing is, Square didn't release this, one chapter, and then, a few months later, another chapter, and so on. They gave you all the chapters at once.
Here. In Japan, they released it chapter by chapter.
I didn't know that, actually. All right, I didn't know that.
Also, the thing that I feel is kind of a kick in the face for people who have it is when they released it on the PSP, which is awesome. I think it's great they released it as an actual game. But they
includes the original.
Yeah, it includes the original and a bonus that you cannot get unless you buy it that links the two of them together.
Really?
I didn't know that.
Yep, it has. Yeah, I believe it's actually 2 extra chapters that take place between 4 and the after years that link them stronger. I mean, it's strongly linked as it is, but it gives a little bit more of what happened in between.
That is a bit of a kick in the face for those who purchased.
For those who purchased on, like you, Brian, and whoever else purchased it on the Wii.
Ronnie.
Sorry.
That's so.
See, there's 2 ways you could view that game, though, because you could say, well, they're ripping me off because they're charging me per chapter, or you could say, this is actually a great deal, because in my case, for example, I only bought the first chapter, wasn't very keen on it, and didn't spend all the money.
Well, I don't think it's a rip-off at all. As long as, some of them, they will charge you an exorbitant amount for it, where by the time you get an actual game, you're spending $100. But like Final Fantasy IV, the after years, you spend, in the end, exactly the same you would get buying it as a regular game. And I think that's very reasonable. And as you said, it makes it very easy to see if you like the game, and if you don't, you only lost a couple bucks.
I agree.
And I can deal with a couple bucks over like 40 or 60.
Non-refundable, non-returnable.
I mean, probably the best example of episodic games are the games that the Telltale people make. Stuff like Sam and Max and Strong Bad and...
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Those games...
Strong Bad's cool game for attractive people.
Exactly. It's a great name. But with those games, they're actually developing the titles as they release them, and they release them on the dot every month. So it's like watching it. It's like consuming a television program. You know it's going to be on every week, and you consume it when it's released.
They've definitely spearheaded this whole movement and proved to the industry, if not to the gamers, that it can work and you can make money this way.
Unlike Valve, who completely fucked up the episodic stuff.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Does anybody actually think there is an episode 3 at this point? Because Gabe Newell has pretty much come out and said, well, we don't really know when that's going to end up happening.
Well,
there'll be a Half-Life 3.
That's kind of a fail.
That's new to me. Can somebody further elaborate on that?
So when
Half-Life?
After Half-Life 2 was released, Valve decided to shift over to episodic content for what they basically said would be Half-Life 3. So they released episode 1 and episode 2 not all that long. I mean, there were gaps between them, but it wasn't as quickly as they said they were going to get it out for, and it wasn't as cheap as kind of they made it sound like it was going to be. And episode 2, Brian, came out. Did it launch with the orange box, guys? Was that that was the whole thing?
Yes, it did.
So 2007, alongside the original Portal. We haven't heard a peep from it since.
Oh.
So you can imagine the episodic part of that gaming has really not done a whole heck of a lot, and Gabe Newell has said in interviews that they don't really have anything. It's not like they have this game sitting somewhere finished and just are pulling a Blizzard, not releasing it because they don't want to cannibalize other sales. They just don't have it done. They just haven't done it.
It really hurt the concept of episodic games when a big developer like that just craps the bed.
Okay, I haven't played Half-Life for the Orange Box, so that was a bit unfamiliar to me. But yeah, I didn't know that. So, and I know though that series, those games have a lot of fans. That's wow.
It's kind of a slap in the face to the fans.
Well,
and yet they go crazy every time an episode is released 2 years after the last episode.
Well, the thing with that is, I think a lot of the problem was they weren't willing to lower the price enough, considering the fact that this is, being put out in pieces that not as many people bought as they thought they were going to. And I think a lot of that has to do with the price. It's a lot like what's going on with ebooks right now, where you price something lower than you would traditionally in the marketplace, but you make up the sales in the volume that you make. If you price it so it's an impulse buy for a gamer, where they go, I'm going to try out Half-Life Episode 1, I'm going to try out Half-Life Episode 2, you're going to get more people trying it.
It's very interesting thought. I didn't know that. Well, thank you kindly for that information. I mean, I'll just go back to Sonic 4, because... Hold on. I mean, I'm a big fan of the classic Sonic series, so when I first heard that Sonic 4 was going to be a true sequel, heading back to its roots, I was psyched.
Oh my god!
Fangirling?
I was almost squeeing to the point of
so was I.
Worthy of you, Ronnie. And but
that's a lot of squealing.
You know how much I squeed the day it came out. The day I found out it came out, I was over at Brian's, and that right then and there, I downloaded it on my iPhone.
And you completed it in an hour and a half.
No, he tried to milk it.
Brian was watching me play it, and we were both just squealing.
And I'm a bit annoyed at Sega because of I think we all saw just how much hype went into this. There was so much build-up. And Episode 1 came out, and it's the first 4 zones of the game. And after that, nothing.
See, that didn't bother me as much. It was basically what I expected in Episode 1 to be. It's if you cut Sonic the Hedgehog 2 into pieces, that's what you get.
Well, yeah, no, I'm not averse to that. I liked what I played.
But they never released the other episodes.
And Sega hasn't said a word.
They haven't mentioned anything about it.
And instead, they went and announced Sonic Generations, which is basically this idea again, but as a full game.
Yeah.
So I'm just
basically,
Sega had its fans shell out $15 for Episode 1, and Sega hasn't said anything.
Well, here's a question: $15 for Episode 1. How many episodes are supposed to be in this? Because after 3...
Sega hasn't said.
Okay, because after 3 episodes, you're paying for more than a full game here.
So I think, if I remember, they were going to do 4, which is incredibly expensive.
Yeah, that's kind of ridiculous.
Well, let's see. If Sonic 4 goes 4 episodes, that ends up being $60. If they release it at the same price point.
Yeah, that's exactly right, and I think...
would any of you pay $60 for a 2D platformer on this day and age?
With the title Sonic the Hedgehog in front of it? You'd be surprised at what people would pay.
I don't think you could release... If you released Sonic... Say Sonic 2 was never made. If you released Sonic 2 as a 2D platformer with just the content of Sonic 2 on a disc for $60, no one would pay for it.
You have a point.
That's what they're selling you if they released 4 episodes.
I agree with you entirely, actually. One thing I was going to say is that I think that, much like with Valve, they overestimated what their price point should be. It really should be much lower than it is, but they wanted to make sure that if they didn't continue this, like it seems like they're not, that they'd recoup their losses. And the $15 price point was their way of hopefully recouping some of those. It's dumb, because they didn't commit to the episodic way of telling the story.
So
they fully intended to drop it if it stopped being marketable, if it stopped being popular.
So another example of a failed episodic game is the Penny Arcade game. They released the first episode for $20, the second episode for $15, and then dropped the project.
Wow.
That's actually the first. I'd actually heard of that game, but I didn't know how it was going. So that's
They stopped making them.
I stand corrected. We have this piece of news kind of flew under the radar, but episode 2 is now in early development.
Why the hell hadn't they already finished episode 2 by the time episode 1 came out? How difficult is it to make some 2D platform?
I think it goes back to what Ronnie was saying, was that Sega might have been a bit tentative, seeing how well episode 1 did.
Yeah, they were afraid to commit. I think a main thing that you have to do for these episodic games to be successful, that Sam & Max has done very well, is you have to commit to it, and you have to commit to a schedule where you can't wait to see how episode 3 turns out before you make episode 4. You need to be in development for episode 4 so that you can release it on a regular schedule, and if you release them on a regular schedule, people will plan to buy it on that schedule. They will have money put aside for that schedule, and you will make more money with that schedule.
Exactly. It goes back to my TV analogy earlier. You know the next episode is next week. Sega releasing episode 2 months from now has lost all the hype and all the build-up and all the momentum of episode 1. Even if I had loved episode 1, which I didn't, I wouldn't be that interested in episode 2 now. That's gone. I'm sorry, I've moved on.
I'd be fine if they went, I'm going to release a new Sonic game, a new Sonic episode every 4 months, and they just kept doing that forever. Maybe occasionally they'll create a compilation and sell it as an actual game. But if they just committed and they just kept making these, because people will keep playing Sonic games, we've been playing them for 20 years,
You basically need to have the whole game completed, and then, start releasing it, is really what should be done. And that way...
Sam & Max don't do that. They're developing these episodes in the month schedule they have before the next release.
Yeah,
they may be an episode ahead, but
that's what I'm saying. They're at least in development on the other projects. They're not, stopping and waiting for the release to see how they did. And that way, at least, maybe you're right. Maybe don't complete the whole thing, but this way, if you need to make tweaks or changes, it's not impossible. But at least then you can still stick to a release schedule and get these things out on time.
Definitely.
And and because of just how long we've waited for even a peep about Sonic 4 Episode 2, really does lend itself to the idea that Sega was a bit hesitant. They didn't know how well Episode 1 would be received. Now that they know that Episode 1 was a financial success, now they've begun early development on Episode 2.
If they want Episode 2 and the rest of this series of episodes to be successful, they need to be in a deep, committed relationship with the idea of episodic gaming.
Needs to make sweet, tender love to it.
That's exactly right.
So we've seen some examples of good episodic format and some bad examples of episodic format. Do you think this is, a trend in video games that's likely to increase, the episodic format?
I'd love to see more episodic RPGs. I think that the idea of telling different stories in the same world that Final Fantasy IV The After Years had, where they all tie together, I think that has so much potential for role-playing games. It's a different way of telling the story.
I don't think it's going to end up continuing, just because I think that the few times when people, by and large, when people have tried to use it, most have not been successful with it. Telltale seems to be the only company that really is able to nail it every single time. So I don't think it's something that you're going to see all that much from other developers.
I definitely agree that we're going to see less of it because people can't commit to schedules and it's too difficult for them to do. It's a great idea in theory, but imagine if Square tried to do this with a big name 3D Final Fantasy. They'd release the first episode and then it would be 2 years before the next one came out.
I think it's kind of like with the difference between console gaming and portable gaming. different games work better on each thing. You're not going to have Final Fantasy 13, be put out on a downloadable episode content. It's going to cost too much to develop. They need to recoup the losses too much. They're not going to be able to do that. But a 2D side-scrolling game, which has been having, has been returning a lot recently, they're perfect for this. I mean, the RPGs, old-fashioned RPGs like Final Fantasy IV was a great example. The one thing you'll see when you keep coming back to anything that worked as episodic, you'll see that it was something that would work well in the format. Sam & Max. Things that don't require, years of development to do. They require some people with some great ideas who are willing to put in some time to make them.
Sonic 4 didn't require years of development.
I agree. There's no reason that we shouldn't have the second one out and the third one coming.
There you go. Ultimately, it's all about sales, because these are businesses.
Unfortunately.
So
that means they act like businesses.
They do. So heading back to downloadable game content, we briefly touched upon this in the first half. We discussed that, back historically, when you bought a game that had additional content, the way to unlock them was through gameplay. But now that downloadable game content can be purchased, does that mean that there's no longer any incentive to really immerse yourself in a game? Since now you can just simply buy your unlockables.
I think that, if you've never played like a game, like if you're just like a casual gamer and you see that you might find it a little hard to play the game to unlock all these unlockables, and then you see that you can buy all these unlockables, then you might buy it. But yeah, I just don't know.
I think it depends on the player. I think some people will be willing to go back and play for these unlockables, and I think there are some people that won't. There's actually an example I want to touch on in a minute about a game with an interesting unlock system, but go ahead and make your point first.
Sorry, I was just going to say, it's kind of like the two examples of a gamer. There's the one that will push himself and search everywhere and really immerse himself in the game. And then there's the gamer who will follow a strategy guide just to know everything and know exactly what to do. Those are the sorts of people I can see leaning towards needing to pay to unlock stuff. The more casual, the more lazy, the more, obviously, the people with money to blow. But I still think you'll still have hardcore gamers who will just immerse themselves.
Well, it does have a good point, though, in that it's not that you're not going to have the gamers who are going to immerse themselves. I think you're always going to have that. But now you're taking away a whole group of things that we used to use, to try to not immerse ourselves, but try to strive to get. And by taking these out of the game where you don't have to strive to achieve them, I think that takes away something from the game. Then again, they've added achievements into most of these things, which I personally despise, but I know a lot of people like, that gives you a different incentive to be awesome at the game.
Okay, Ben, I think it's now on to you. You wanted to make a point.
Yeah, there was an example of some kind of content that I wanted to kind of bring up earlier, and I kind of forgot. But like you said, with incentives now to just buy all the other content, is it as much fun to immerse yourself in the game? Sony releases annually a baseball series that had an interesting addition from last year's mode that let you buy training points. The equivalent, the analogy kind of, tongue-in-cheek was made that it was like purchasing a performance-enhancing drug, which, baseball's had a big problem with steroids and other things.
Yeah.
But the idea here was it was really an interesting an addition because, other player, you wouldn't be like marked in any way. You wouldn't have any kind of detriments for doing this. You were paying for something that, you as the player were paying for something that was going to give you a bit of a competitive advantage, because now your created custom character was going to be able to develop faster, and the more money you sunk into this, just the quicker and quicker they'd be able to develop. So it did become a nice shortcut, and I thought it was an interesting it was kind of a nice cross between the whole idea of, well, you're not going to pay to just unlock everything because they felt that would be too easy, but at the same time, here was a way to allow players who wish to spend a little bit more money and give themselves a competitive advantage, if you will. And I just kind of wanted to see what people thought about something, like that system. It's not totally unlocking everything, but at the same time, it's enough that it might convince people to drop a couple of dollars on it.
Isn't that just unlocking the easy mode, though?
No,
Yes.
well, not exactly, because the way, the level up system, think of it as just, for every dollar you spend, you get 1,000 experience points.
Right.
Through a traditional RPG. It's not that you're unlocking any easy mode because the rest of the difficulty doesn't adjust.
It's basically erasing the grind that you get in many RPGs, where you have to stay in a particular area and kill 1,000 hedgehogs.
Exactly. I mean, Josh, you can't tell me you've never, if that option was available in some games that you've played, that you wouldn't have been tempted to take it.
I guess, but I wouldn't pay for it.
Well, no, but you could see at least where the allure comes in. It's not that you're removing all of the game and you're not even removing all of the content. You're literally just paying for the convenience of not having to deal with one annoying grind section.
In a non-competitive game, I think that's fine. But in a game where I assume this, as you said, that would affect multiplayer, I think that actually gives them an unfair advantage. If this is a single-player RPG, if I could pay money to level up in Final Fantasy XIII, I have no problem with that. I wouldn't pay the money, but other people would. But I think that's similar to MMOs that require you, or don't require you, but that to get some of the best equipment in the game, you have to give money. And then you'll be stronger than other people.
It's primarily, if not exclusively, for a single-player RPG-like campaign, but I don't remember if it can be used on an online component. I don't know off the top of my head. But, I mean, the primary use of it is for, like you're saying, the single-player campaign, which does have a lot of RPG elements to it.
I think to give them credit, a lot of companies are careful for, like, the multiplayer component, that they don't offer this sort of stuff so that you can, in Call of Duty, buy the best weapon so that you can just blow everyone up unfairly.
Yes, I can certainly understand for a single-player RPG. Lord knows I've wanted to not spend 10 hours in Dragon Quest level grinding, but...
Isn't that the appeal?
Yeah, well...
It is and it isn't. Though, you are right, it is the point of the game.
Yes.
If you don't like that, maybe it's not the game you should be playing.
That's true.
But each to their own.
Each to their own. I still personally like to, immerse myself completely in a game. It's
As do I.
It's that little thing that kind of gives you a small bit of ego boost once you've unlocked and completed everything in the game.
And I get a sense of accomplishment when I do that without having downloaded or cheated or just grinded through it all by myself.
This is actually a really good question to each of you guys, and I'll say my little piece on it. But what would you spend money on in a game? What do you feel is downloadable content you'd be willing to pay for?
If it as long as it helps advance the story, I would not have a problem purchasing additional content.
It really depends on the game, because to bring back the example I brought up earlier of Burnout Paradise, I took all the extra content because it was free, but when it came time to pay for a second island, I realized that my interest in the game had started really to wane, and to me I didn't think that the investment of $10 or whatever it was going to be a smart one, just because I didn't think that once I had the additional play area that I would want to keep playing. So I think it has to be something there where the game already really has my interest and I really am excited about continuing to play with it. But at the same time, don't forget this other content may have been cut for the original game for a reason. Sometimes it's just not up to par. Maybe that's why it was held back. It's not always going to be on the same level as the rest of the game experience itself. So you also have to kind of carefully weigh what you're going to be getting for what you're spending.
Sometimes with this downloadable content, you also find that it's the B team developing it while the A team has moved on to another project.
That's a good point.
Yeah, did anybody play either one of Fable 2's episode packs? I played one of them and it wasn't bad, and I was thinking about picking up the second one, but all the reviews just continually said it's really not worth it. So, I mean, in that case, maybe it was just the B team, or maybe, they had just scrapped together some unused ideas, cobbled it together, and wanted to see if anybody would spend the $10 on it.
Well, then again, they also produced Fable 3.
Of course.
I kind of felt the same way about Return to Ostagar, where it wasn't really worth the money. Brian, what do you think?
The only times I've actually purchased additional content for a game is if there was a side story involved. Resident Evil 5, for example. I purchased the scenario where you have Chris and Jill going after Wesker. And, usually I don't like to do anything until I have completed the main game first. Just that's how I've always been. I don't usually look at cheats or a strategy guide or anything like that until I have completed the main game.
And then it's time for completion.
Yes, and then it's time to see, alright, what else does this game got? But, again, I'm still of the opinion that, once I have the disc, I should be able to access anything on it. Mostly it depends on the game, but, that's just my take on it. Once I complete the main game, then it's open season.
I can understand that. For me, I have no problem paying, as you said before, for additional story, for a side quest. I have no problem paying for additional content that lengthens the game, that's meaningful.
Yep.
And I don't mind playing for additional gameplay modes if it's something I feel I'm going to enjoy. As much as I think it should have been part of the regular game, at what was it, $1, I had no problem buying Proto Man in the new Mega Man. No problem at all. Because it actually, other than the character actually played differently. It played like the Mega Man in the later games, where you could slide and you could charge, while the Mega Man in the game is more classic style, for those who haven't played it.
Well,
okay, I'm done.
There you go. You got your answers?
I was just curious.
All right.
Sorry for running your podcast.
Oh, that's okay. That's quite all right. Anyway, so as we begin to wind down here, I'll give you this final thought to chew on. Do we expect the trend of downloadable game content to continue?
Yes.
Yes.
Most definitely.
Agreed.
Games are getting more and more expensive, and they desperately need to find more ways to get money out of you.
Yes, but do you think that it may reach a point where the studios are going to start alienating their bases because the prices of the additional content become a bit excessive?
Some companies probably will.
It will be controlled, though, because people will accept things after a certain point, and if they go insane in the pricing or what they're offering, people will vote with their wallets and not pay for it.
I think there's an interesting trend that's kind of happening where, as we look at it, it's getting harder and harder to really be a developer just because of the extreme costs associated with so many things. So yes, you're going to see trends of people kind of looking for alternate avenues for revenue, but at the same time, I think you're going to see people respond a little bit more to it and actually continue to pay it, only because the sheer number of titles might start dwindling a little bit, and it's, well, if I don't pay to support this guy, I may not get anything coming from it. Somebody brought this up in relation to how there are here in the States, there's basically one title per sport, for sports realistic games, and they wondered if this kind of trend could start continuing in other areas where just if there's not enough real competition. My point being, if there's not really as many developers, people are going to want to make sure that they can continue to get whatever they can. If content from really good developers that they trust starts getting, longer and longer between releases, they'll pay probably to continue, playing from the same people.
I think that the trend will continue. I mean, with these days of internet and online multiplayer, I think downloadable content's going to continue. I'm not really a big fan of it. I think I really don't want to spend upwards of $100 on a game. But it is what it is, and I'll just not pay for it. I'll buy the game, and that'll be that.
Good for you.
Yes. Good for me. I know.
Just buy Nintendo games. They have no idea what online networks are.
That's my big problem with them.
He does buy Nintendo games.
I do buy Nintendo games. I'm still a Nintendo fanboy. Everyone with each successive generation, people keep saying Nintendo is down and out. They're done. They're doomed.
They haven't looked at the numbers, have they?
Yeah,
They have not looked at the numbers.
When this generation of consoles is all said and done, we've moved on to the next generation. The Wii is the big winner.
The Wii is the new regular Nintendo. There's a whole generation of gamers right now who are going to be looking back on the Wii and talking about how they're Nintendo fanboys, the way, Brian, you and I look back on the regular Nintendo and the Super Nintendo and say, this is why we're Nintendo fanboys. They gave us these, and we still believe they can do good.
So, there we go. There we go. So yes, downloadable game content is here to stay. Some of us may like it, some of us may not like it. But, again, it's up to you and your wallet. What are you willing to shell out? So that's that.
But this downloadable content, this podcast, is free.
Is completely free of charge. It's not,
Thanks, iTunes.
Is absolutely free of charge.
If you'd like to make a donation of baby souls, please send it to Brian Williams.
Yes. That's only if you want to make a donation. What I'd rather you do is tell me what you think on Facebook and Twitter. Go to facebook.com/downloadablecontent or on Twitter at DLContent and let us hear your thoughts. What do you think? But on that note, I would like to thank Joshi, Ronnie, Ben, and Ryan for their wonderful commentary and thoughts on this issue. And we shall see you around. Have a good one, everybody.